Hi everyone, thank you for coming to my talk today, and thanks Daza for organizing the talk. So this is the paper I already published, and I got the ECR Best Paper Award from Daza last year. So I'm going to talk about the production of counter space in Dhaka. But before that, I would like to start with the acknowledgement of country. I'd acknowledge that I live and work on the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation's land and pay my respects to their elders past and present. That's kind of the background of my outline of my paper. So I'll talk briefly about the background of the research and then talk about the conceptual framework I used in this paper and the methods I used for this study, findings and discussion and conclusion. So in this talk, I'll take you to Dhaka, Bangladesh. So Dhaka is one of the fastest growing cities in the world with a population of 20 million. And this population growth is not because the population growth is high in Bangladesh. It's because in Bangladesh, Dhaka is the capital city and it's kind of a primate city. So everything is like in Dhaka. So for example, all the best educational institutions is in Dhaka, and then all the factories are kind of in Dhaka. So people often migrate from rural areas to Dhaka in search of jobs and education and other purposes. So every year, nearly 300,000 to 400,000 people migrate to Dhaka. And many of these people are poor people moving to Dhaka in search of livelihoods. However, there are not many formal employment opportunities for these people. So many of these people ended up living in slums or informal settlements, and they often rely on accessing to public space for doing informal activities and earning incomes through their informal activities. So this is part of my PhD research. So I did my PhD at the University of Queensland. And during my PhD research, I used a case study slum known as Shatala slum in Dhaka to conduct my study. And so these are some photos. You can see the map of Dhaka city and then the Shatala slum, and some of the photos about like different informal workers and their work. And so in this paper, I kind of talk about like how informal workers access to public spaces make informal pacts with different groups of people, because access to public space for livelihoods is an important issue for informal workers in many global south countries, but access to public space for earning incomes are kind of illegal, like any other developed countries. So informal workers often have to negotiate with different actors, formal and informal actors, to access the space. And I'll talk about the role of kinship in this process. But before that, in this paper, I used the conceptual framework of informality, social capital, trans-local network, and livelihoods, and place, space, and counter space. So very briefly, conceptual discussions on informality have gained popularity in urban studies since the introduction of neoliberal policies in the 1970s. The discussion has ranged from seeing informality as an economic category operating outside the formal sector of modern capitalist economy to perspectives that recognizes the continuum between the formal and informal, and as a mode of transcending the domain of state regulation. And so Ananda Roy, she used the term urban informality to refer to a state of regulation one where the ownership, use, and purpose of land cannot be fixed and mapped according to any prescribed set of regulations or the law. These kinds of informal practices led to informal urbanization, where elite groups also encroach on land in the same way as the urban poor, yet their encroachments are ignored by the state, whereas the urban poor are labeled as criminals for engaging in the same behavior. In this discussion, Bayat contributes to by arguing that the urban poor utilize an informal and contested governance in accessing public space. such as street pavements, crossroads, urban land, and spaces of assembly. As a Bayat refers to this special practice as the quiet encroachment of the ordinary. The term quiet encroachment refers to the silent, protracted, but pervasive advancement of the ordinary people on the property and powerful to survive and improve their lives, marked by quiet, largely automized, and prolonged mobilization with episodic collective action. The practice of quiet encroachment of the ordinary often leads to forms of resistance against formal rules and regulations, forming a passive network among the people who use public space while working on the street. And in this paper, I employ this idea of urban informality and quiet encroachment of ordinary to explore how the state has created informality in terms of use of public space by poor people, and how the formal and informal rules, regulations, and norms are used to govern this space. While working in the informal sector, the urban poor also heavily rely on social networks to get by their everyday life. Social capital has become an important concept in social and political sciences, human geography, and economics since the 1990s, and it has been applied successfully in livelihood research. An important contribution of the social capital approach in livelihood research is that it emphasizes the importance of having strong social networks and using these networks to get by everyday life. This is particularly crucial in global south cities, where states hardly provide basic services to the urban poor. Consequently, the urban poor rely on their translocal social networks. The term translocal social networks refers to sets of multi-directional and overlapping networks constituted through migration, in which the exchange of resources, practices, and ideas links. Translocality is not automatically created through migration, but it is formed through regular communication, through the exchanges of resources, and through investments in one's social, local, and translocal network. In particular, social networks are important to the notion of translocality, as they conceptually link agents as well as structure and agency. They form the interpersonal structures that connect individual agents, institutions, and organizations, constituting the social space within and between places. In Dhaka, translocal networks are often produced through place-based connectivity. So connections with local kin and friendship networks, who often encourage the rural poor to migrate to urban areas. And rural poor often rely on this network to access to livelihood practices. Thus, I apply the translocal social capital framework to examine how the urban poor in Dhaka use their translocal social networks in accessing public space for livelihoods and produce counter space, breaking the planned order of the city. So in this paper, I also use the idea of counter space, which is a term Henry Lefebvre coined. So Lefebvre kind of discussed about the production of a space, and he develops a conceptual triad in his theory. So there are like three different spaces he discussed about. So the first one is a spatial practice or perceived space, and then conceived space and lived space. So the way he defined perceived space refers to the physical framework of a place, or the roots, networks, and concrete features that link everyday life and activities to private life and leisure. For the urban poor of Dhaka, any kind of land, any kind of open perceived space can be regarded as a space of livelihood, whereas conceived space is tied to the relations of production and to the order to that those relations impose, such as knowledge, science to codes. So by conceived space, what Lefebvre meant is like the way city is designed by planners, regulators, government actors. So it's very much top-down approach. And then he discussed about his third conceptual idea, lived space, where the lived space is a space where kind of we live. And so he kind of pointed out that lived space depicts the images of users and inhabitants rather than the designers or the processes that produce the physical space. So one of the critics of Lefebvre's theory of the production of space is like urban space is produced heavily following a top-down approach, very much from the planners and state actors' perspectives. So the general people, their idea is kind of, or their needs sometimes are ignored. And so he came up with a new concept where he talked about like how people, marginalized groups, they have a right to the city and they could reframe or like reproduce the city's space by breaking the planned order of the city. And this process he termed as making kind of counter space. So Lefebvre discusses the possibility of the production of a counter space by marginalized groups or people from below. Counter spaces can be produced by challenging hegemonic power and by reappropriating conceived space, going beyond the purpose for which it was conceived. And so in this paper, I kind of showed how the urban poor, they kind of remake cities space and the networks they use to reproduce cities space, which I kind of said the production of counter space. In terms of methods, as it is part of my PhD project, and kind of this photo, that's me. I was doing field work. One of my friends took photos, but I was not interviewing that person, so should be okay. She's not my direct participant. And all the photos in this presentation are taken by me. So yeah, I didn't put any copyright, but I took all those photos while doing field work in Dhaka. So I did a qualitative case study, as I have already mentioned, and I recruited my participants from a slum, Shatala slum. I did field work for 4 months, and I conducted in-depth interviews with 94 informal workers, 18 women and 76 men, because there were not many women informal vendors. And then I also interviewed 37 key informants from different departments, government, local leaders, NGO officials, NGO-formed community members, and landlords. Interviews lasted between 30 to 90 minutes. I also observed informal practices of these people both within the slum and outside the slum. And recently, I published a book based on my research, and yeah, you can see that book. It's published last year. And I could talk about my book another day, but I'm going to move to the findings section now. So what I found from my research is like the urban poor, they often rely on their translocal networks. And so first, often when they move to Dhaka, they stay with their relatives. They also get like the necessary business capital sometimes from their relatives. And so this is one of my participants, Miraj. He told how like he moved to Dhaka and then how he relied on his relatives in the first few months. So Miraj said, I have been living in Dhaka for 5 years. My relatives live here. I did not like my village as there are not many employment opportunities. So I talked to my relatives first and then decided to come to Dhaka. My uncle's son and aunt's son live here. The month I came to Dhaka, I did not rent a room. I used to live with my cousins. I rented a room in the following month. At first, I started my business at Mohakali, that's an area near their slum, Shatava slum. I used other people's vending site at the beginning. If someone decided not to go for vending on a particular day, I used to sell in their place. Sometimes they also offer me their vending site, as I was new in this business. They did this favor saying, I'm not going today. You may go. You are new in this business, so you go. So it's kind of showing like how his relatives or like his external networks helped him to set up his business in the initial stage. And this is a kind of a diagram that I kind of use to showcase how people often rely on direct family relatives and like other external networks or kinship networks. So we often say extended kinship networks. And in this kind of diagram, I'm showing like how people migrated from different parts of the Bangladesh, but many of them are actually migrated from one particular area of Bangladesh known as Bhola, which is a small kind of town in the south of Bangladesh. And many of these people actually migrated because of floods. So sometimes they lost kind of their lands or their houses because of floods. So many of them moved to Dhaka to earn incomes. And this table shows like how urban poor and informal workers often rely on their networks, kinship networks, to get their business capital. So most of these people borrowed from their relatives. Some of them borrowed money for their businesses from NGOs. And so this also showcases how these poor people, this group of people rely heavily on their kinship networks for accessing kind of financial capital. They also learn how to do business, and they came to know like they have to pay certain amount of money or bribe every day to a person locally known as lineman. So this lineman collects money from all the vendors in a particular area every day, and then he gives it to a local politician or local police station so that the police don't evict them. And so Kollol, another participant, he kind of explaining this process. And also I found there like a couple of people who were in the same business, so they all used to do this. They used to make something called chicken saslik, and they learned this mechanism from one of the people who first migrated to Dhaka from Bhola, and he started this business, and this business got really popular. And so many of the people who migrated from Bhola learned how to make this pork chop or chicken saslik, and then they started kind of selling them. So now there's a community. There are like around 40 people in the slum, in Shatala slum, who are in this business. And so they were talking about like how, because they're a big community, a supplier comes to Shatala to supply chicken to everyone, whoever is engaged in this business. And then he was kind of giving me an account of like how much he bought. So he said like, today I bought 4 kilos chicken. I bought 20 kilos of cow's stomach at 14, the price is like $14 from Wireless Care, one area near the Shatala slum. I always buy cow's stomach from him. I also bought 2 kilos of papaya, 3 kilos of cucumber, and spices of $2 from Shatala market. And so they often kind of make an informal impact kind of connection with different powerful actors locally, and then try to kind of occupy public spaces to earn their incomes. The other strategies they apply is sometimes they make good relations with local shopkeepers, and sometimes they use like the open space in front of the shop to put their materials and sell there. So, for example, I interviewed a shopkeeper who led this banana seller to continue their business in front of their shop. So he kind of said that space where the banana seller sits with his basket was open. So he sits over there as he is bored. I didn't tell him anything. Sometimes police come and ask us about these people, and we tell them they are our people. So police kind of come to evict any kind of hawkers or vendors. But if the shopkeepers kind of say he is doing business as part of his business, then they usually let those people stay. So this is one strategy those informal actors use. And then the other one, as I have mentioned, like they often pay bribe to police and linemen. So Sakib talked about that. And so he's saying, he's kind of explaining how much money every day they have to pay to these different groups of formal and informal actors. So he said, my brother pays $3.57, and he explains it as a rent for a space, like rent for using public space. For doing business in Bonani, that's an affluent neighborhood in Dhaka near Shatala slum. He pays $0.24, and $1 equivalent to nearly 80 Bangladeshi taka. So it's a lot of money if you convert. So he pays $0.24 to a lineman for the police, $1 to a local Army League leader. So that's the kind of ruling political party, Army League. And so their local leader, they kind of get money from these people. And 0.48 and $0.59 to two other leaders. They are our local leaders. That's why we have to pay them, whether we like it or not. Otherwise, they will not allow us to run our business there. Police don't help us in this regard. So they have connections with police, and they often pay a certain amount of money to police so that these people are not evicted from their business spaces. However, these vendors do not earn much, so because they have to pay a large amount of money to this lineman, one of them kind of said to me, like, it makes them really sad, but then there is no other alternative. So if they don't pay, they can't do business. And police don't help if they complain, because this is the nature of the informal work. So it's like they're using public space and police can't do anything. So they have to basically make a pact with these informal actors to continue their businesses. And so another participant said, the senior police officers force them to evict us. So sometimes the local city council runs eviction episodes, but he's like, sometimes police, because police gets bribed. I was asking, like, then why police sometimes evict you? And so he said, like, because like the senior police officers, they might get order from the local mayor, and so they had to kind of evict us. Also, not everybody gave money to police station, so sometimes the new traders often argue with police, and then they want to move from the space, so police kind of evicted those people. And then I asked, like, whether police directly collect money, because I know sometimes police directly collect money from informal vendors. But then he said, like, no, if police collected money from us directly, that would be good. They have mediators. So that mediators, he said, lineman for that. So they get a share of from the collected money. There are duty cars, police duty cars, who drive around the road at night. Sometimes they take money. They collect $0.24 from us. There are also police from the camp. There are civilian police. And if we don't give them money, they will come again wearing civilian dress and take money from you. And then he's kind of saying the big terrorists of Dhaka City are police, so they are not really protecting them, rather they are kind of putting pressure on them to pay illegally. And so, like, although they have to pay police and like other informal powerful actors, in this paper, I kind of argue that like they still kind of change the planned order of the city by using their kinship networks. And so my main argument is like, it's still this kind of payment is useful because they're creating a network, and then they're changing and they're using the space in a different way than the way the planned order of the city was designed. So in this paper, I argue that the urban poor are able to break the planned order of the city, which later termed as conceived space, and produces a counter space by using a range of strategies, such as quiet encroachment of land, utilizing translocal migrant networks, using spatial mobility and making informal, mutually beneficial pacts with a range of local state and non-state actors, working outside of their formal roles. The urban poor rely heavily on their kin and fictive kin and use their translocal networks in appropriating and reappropriating public space for livelihoods. It should be noted that the urban poor of Dhaka do not rely only on their kinship networks. Rather, similar practices are evident in other parts of the global south, where strong social networks and kinship play an important role in the livelihood practices of the urban poor. Although this practice is to some extent different from the welfare states in the global north, who often provide safety nets for the marginalized groups. This is an important network for the urban poor in the global south, as southern states do not provide much employment opportunities or other public services for the urban poor. Thus, the findings contribute to the sociological literature on mobility and social network. as well as demonstrate the importance of adopting a translocal view in researching the livelihoods of the urban poor, which can enhance our understanding on the complex rural-urban connections that comprise an important element of livelihood strategies for migrant households. In addition, the findings reveal that street vendors quickly learn about the mandatory security payment system and rules of the street from their kin and social networks, and use these methods to appropriate available public space. Bayat has described these practices as street politics. By learning these rules of the street and entering into an informal pact with powerful state and non-state actors, vendors break the planned legal order of the city to produce a counter space, which they use for their livelihood. Counter spaces are produced by a marginalized group in opposition to the concept spaces constructed by the state apparatus. As Lutfun notes, the rationality of the state, with techniques, plans, and programs provoke opposition, as vendors of Shatala are not sufficiently organized or motivated to confront the state directly and claim their right to appropriate space. They construct counter spaces through everyday tactics, such as appropriating a space quietly and with high mobility. This paper makes a significant contribution to the literature on urban sociology in general, and the production of space and counter space in particular, revealing how the poor, using meager resources, defend themselves against the state's hegemonic production of space to produce a counter space, transgressing state-constructed concept of space by using a range of strategies. And kind of making an informal pact with different state and non-state actors working outside of their formal roles. Masons, linemen, police, and local politicians all have a stake in this game or in this kind of continued operation of street vending. And they do their best to ensure that vendors continue to operate despite pressure from above and the necessity to act on regular campaigns to clear the streets of informal trades. The localized nature of these informal economic relations means that they are unavoidably socially embedded, working at a spatial and social level, where day-to-day contact is inevitable and therefore subject to the norms of behavior that regular local contact demands. Despite this mutually beneficial arrangement, a substantial power imbalance still exists. However, street vendors have very limited power to resist the state authorities and the demands of the state or local representatives of the state acting informally. Presenting this case using a critical lens has enabled me to go beyond the production of the planned and conceived spaces of a city that has preoccupied much of the existing literature. Moreover, this paper has provided a concrete account of the grassroots production of counter space outside of the planned order of the city. The processes of the production and reproduction of counter spaces presented in this paper have ramifications beyond the specific case of Dhaka or the South Asian urban context. While this case relies on the specific urban experiences of one marginalized group and their production of a counter space, the process described in this paper is relevant to other cities, where the hegemonic power of the state cannot be challenged through the usual channels of civil society or free media. Where these conditions prevail, considered spaces are produced to create homogenic space, often forcibly erasing other narratives and ignoring marginalized groups' right to the city. To explore how marginalized groups access public space, how they negotiate in access, and what are the different strategies they utilize in different contexts, this kind of study would be really useful. And so that's pretty much it from me. Thank you very much. I already published this paper, so this is kind of the reference of the paper. So if you are interested, you can read the paper. Now, if anyone has any questions, comments, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lutfun, on behalf of TASA. And we do have a few people. Are there any questions? If so, just unmute your microphone and perhaps identify yourself.
Hello.
Yes.
This is Mohammed Saiduddin from Malaysia. Good morning, and I think over there it is good afternoon to you. So, sorry I was a little bit late to log in. There was a problem, technical problem. But I enjoyed your presentation by Lutfun and Lata. And thank you for a very informative presentation. So it's very, catchy topic for me because I was also doing research in Malaysian foreign workers, which is also one of the point that you highlighted, the kinship network is also linked together.
Yeah,
Now, my question is, it was very interesting when I saw the methodology part, that you have gone through 94 in-depth interviews.
yeah.
For me, it is, I don't know, I would like to go through if I have the opportunity to the main book or your book. I mean, how you do it? Is it all the unit of analysis, all are the local informal vendors or what? I mean, it is in-depth interviews, right? How you manage the data?
Okay, great
Can you
question.
just can you just elaborate a little bit about this?
Yeah. Thank you, Syed. So I should have said that I had 4 research assistants, and so they did some interviews for me. So I think 4 of them, like each of them did 10 interviews, but I kind of trained them first. So they used to go with me. I did the initial most of the interviews, and then they helped me to do some interviews, and I paid them for doing that RA work. And I also trained them. So initially, because I was an assistant professor at the University of Dhaka, so when I was doing my PhD, so I asked one of my departmental colleagues whether they are like some students who are doing master's thesis or something. So I'll just showcase them how we do research, and I'll pay them for their research assistant service. So yeah, so I had 4 research assistants, and they helped me with the 40 interviews, and I did the rest of the interviews. So that's how I did so many interviews. And I used to do quantitative research before, so I have like a bit of a thing for data. I know in qualitative research you don't really need that data, and my data was kind of saturated long before I finished kind of 94 interviews. But I also interviewed different groups, and I was trying to find out like whether any new things emerge. And so that's how I did all these interviews. Thank you.
Thank you. So based on you, I think it's a qualitative research, because the volume is it high? What do you think? The volume is,
It's
have you?
hard. I didn't use all the data. So, for example, I interviewed also garments workers, domestic workers. I didn't almost use those data in my thesis. Then I had a case study, like there was a gated community just beside my case study slab, Niketan. And so I didn't use that whole chapter in my thesis. So I wrote a paper. I have a paper in the housing studies, not housing studies, I forgot. I think housing policy debate, the journal. So I wrote a paper. That's the area of gated community based on that's the area of, I forgot the total name of the paper, but yeah, that's the area of kind of gated community where we have no access or something. So it was based on that data, which I did not use in my book or in my thesis. So I have lots of data. I didn't use all the data that I have in my thesis. Thank you.
Thank you. So now we can advise our student also, they can go further beyond more than 30 respondents, right? 30, whatever. So it's very good. Thank you so much for sharing your thoughts. Back to you, Rosa Williamson. Thank you.
And thank you for coming. Yeah, lovely meeting you. Thanks for your question.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you for the question. Any other questions? I might just ask you, Lutfun, could you just elaborate a little bit on the concept of the lineman? Are they a formal position? How do they how do they become linemen? Are they because they're big and strong and, like,
Yeah, nice question. Great question, Roger. So they are not big or like powerful. What happens like they are often followers of the ruling political parties. So maybe there's a local MP, for example, there's a local MP, and then many people follow that MP, and there are like many followers. And one of the followers might just decide that they would collect money, and then they would just go and collect money from vendors, but they would say that MP, for example, I'm just creating a name like Abul. Abul is an MP, and I follow Abul, and Abul told me to collect money from you. So this is very informal. There's no formal. But then they use that political power and political affiliation to collect money from these vendors. So it's very informal. Does that make sense? You are on mute, Roger. You are on mute, Roger. Unmute.
sorry. So it seems like quite a lot of people ask for money from these vendors. Do they actually make any money out of it?
Not much. Like if they earn like 250 Bangladeshi taka, they probably pay like 100 taka to all these different linemen and police. Yeah. So police is kind of formal actors, but police also take bribes. So it's just, they also collect money. So sometimes.
Now, I don't know Dhaka that well in terms of factory labor and so forth, but I know there's a sort of a burgeoning factory network in Bangladesh, even though it's incredibly dangerous. That's how in the West we know about it. Is this seen as an alternative to factory labor?
Like a garments factory labor, the informal labor. Did you mean that?
Yes.
So in the garment sector, I think many young, like in my research, when I was doing research, I didn't find many young women vendor, because it's like they all work in the garments industry sector. But then male vendors kind of mostly work in this sector. So I think there are not many probably employment opportunities for these vendors to work in the factories. But also the population is so high, there are not many factories that would accommodate all the vendors or like all the poor people, because the population is like 20 million in Dhaka, and maybe almost like 300,000 or 400,000 or more than that people are like poor people who live in informal settlements. But I don't think there are many factories where they could go and work. So it's just a difficult situation for them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.